Tune in to the Onyx Report, a bi-weekly analysis of how black males of all stripes experience American society and navigate misandry. Join me, Dr. T. Hasan Johnson, Associate Professor of Africana Studies at Fresno State and founder of the concept of black masculinism, to examine the issues that impact the lives of black males, from history to politics, media to policy, and spirituality to economics. Join me to explore the hidden stories of black men and boys, and we'll discern them from the stories imposed on them. Listen to the Onyx Report live on InnerlightRadio.com every first and third Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern. Check out episodes on demand at your convenience on my website at www.thasanjohnson.com. Also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/dr.hassanj, Twitter at twitter.com/Lord Hasan, YouTube at Dr. T. Hasan Johnson, and finally my Black Masculinist blog at www.newblackmasculinities.wordpress.com. Welcome to the Onyx Report, a program that critically analyzes the experiences, histories, and perceptions of black males in American society. I'm Dr. T. Hasan Johnson, Associate Professor of Africana Studies at Fresno State, black male advocate, and black male studies scholar. In the program, we examine current events while engaging concepts ranging from institutionalized anti-black misandry to gynocentrism from a black masculinist perspective. Our goal is to remind people of black men's humanity. Call in after a half hour to the show at 310-928-7733. All right. Good day, everybody. Glad people are listening in. That goes to the Inner Light Radio community, those who are coming to Inner Light Radio to hear us, and also those who will be listening to this on YouTube. Please make sure you hit the like button and drop a comment and subscribe as well. We are in our 6th episode of the Onyx Report with Dr. T. Hasan Johnson, and this is a pretty exciting one for me because as a brother I really look up to, really value, who's agreed to come on and be interviewed today. So, but before we get to that, as I've started to do in recent episodes, I'd like to kind of give a smattering of some of the current events that have drawn my attention, especially in regard to black males, that might color our conversation today a bit. I'm definitely going to be throwing some current events at our guest and seeing what his thoughts are about it. First I wanted to mention is that the film Brian Banks is still in theaters, to my knowledge, depending on your city. If you're in a place as small as Fresno, you probably got about a good 2-week run before films like that disappear. But if you haven't had a chance to see it, I would urge you to go do it, support it. I definitely encourage people to take, especially young black men, to see the film just to become aware of what's possible, what they may have to endure, what they may have to deal with, and have dialogue with them about that, you know. But definitely go see the film Brian Banks. I can say, sadly enough, I went to see it twice here in Fresno, and at one instance, I took my 14-year-old son, and the theater only had a couple of people in it. And as people know on my Facebook page and on my Twitter, I will take pictures of the theater and send them out because I want people to see it. You know, I started doing this back when Nate Parker's Birth of a Nation came out because it blew my mind that these stories about black males would get such little attention, right? So in that sense, I want people to see it. I want people to know what's going on. So definitely go support the film Brian Banks. Also, shout out to my academics in general who may be listening to this in light of what took place at Cal State Fullerton this past week, where a Cal State Fullerton employee was killed arbitrarily on campus. It's becoming more and more an occupational hazard to be an academic on campuses. So just be mindful that this is happening. Keep your eyes open and your head on a swivel. There are a couple of articles of note that I know we will be discussing in a little bit that took place in the last couple weeks. You have Ryan Twyman, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name properly. It looks like Twyman. It might be Twyman of L.A., who was shot by Los Angeles police officers 34 times, as well as in the same day, I want to say 4 or 5 others who were killed by police officers. We have Devon Bailey, who were killed by Colorado Springs police on body cam footage when he took off running. And of course, we're easy and quick to dismiss anybody running as if running is synonymous with guilt. But when you've grown up as a black male in this system and you start to understand the relationship with the police, although I don't suggest that people take off running, it can be an impulse, especially for younger men out of fear, because of how people have been treated. Even when I was young, I would be routinely thrown on the ground by police officers and frisked arbitrarily and even threatened in terms of being accused of something I didn't do, just to, incite fear. So I do understand the impulse, and that does not justify his death. There are all kinds of other methods that could have been used to subdue him. We also have black teens threatened at gunpoint by a white woman when they were going door to door in Wynne, Arkansas, knocking on doors, trying to raise money, things of that nature. You have a black man framed by NYPD for rape, Mark Denny, who was released after 30 years and found innocent of the crime and was awarded $10 million in court only if he agreed not to sue for up to $50 million, strangely enough. So these are the kinds of incidents taking place. Mateen Cleaves, former Michigan State basketball star, found innocent of sexual assault. This is on ESPN. If you're interested, you can find the article there, where the jury didn't find the accuser's testimony believable. Her story kept changing, and yet Mr. Cleaves' story didn't. And yet these are the kind of stories, going back to Brian Banks, that we're starting to see. Black men found more and more innocent on a regular basis. But then you have smaller stories, like stories like the young boy, I won't read his name, but you can find the article written on the Yahoo website by Camila Newton, a 7-year-old boy who was handcuffed for crying. These are the kind of things we have to begin to pay attention to on a whole different level. And I would say, especially in school, across race, we have to be mindful of that. But there are a series of stories like this that intrigue me because they speak to the black male experience and yet can be easily dismissed. And although I have 10 other stories that I can share and we might bring up in the course of the discussion, the last one I want to bring up is the mother of a 35-year-old Texas woman who pled guilty to taking her son to the hospital 323 times with 13 major surgeries. And this is Kayleen Bowen, arrested on December 6, 2017, for what she was doing to her child, claiming he had a rare genetic disorder when she was actually just inciting him for unnecessary surgery. So I want to put these things on the table because I think in many ways these frame the kind of conversations that I want to see happen, where black men especially take center stage to reflect upon our experience and make sense of what's going on, as well as inform. Well, today, one who I hope and know will continue to help us understand this is one Dr. Ronald B. Neal, Associate Professor, Department of Study of Religions at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Dr. Neal has an MDiv from the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, Georgia, as well as a Ph.D. from Vanderbilt University in Religion, Ethics, and Culture. Those of you who may have had the chance to either watch the Black Male Studies online conference at Fresno State may know of him. You may know of him from his social media or from his books, published author of 2012's Democracy in 21st Century America, Race, Class, Religion, and Region, and that's on Mercer University Press. And he also has an upcoming text, Beyond Death and Jail, hip hop, religion, and mass incarceration. So the brother is definitely well informed, and he's a good colleague. We speak on a regular basis, and he's always bringing something new for me to consider. So I want to welcome Dr. Neal to the Onyx Report. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to be a part of this conversation, man.
Oh, man. Absolutely. No, thank you for coming. I actually wanted to start. I have plenty of questions to pose, but I actually wanted to start with your response to a quote. And this is a quote from Amos Wilson, Dr. Amos Wilson, from his book, Black on Black Violence. And he says, to be an African-American male is to be singled out for intense and sadistic frustration, to be psychologically castrated, emasculated, and feminized, to have your group and personal coin always devalued, to see your people praying hard, singing loud and long, ecstatically moaning, groaning, shouting, feigning, and groveling before a hand-me-down God who seems to reward their spiritual devotion with ever-increasing deprecation, while those who flout the authority of that God are overloaded with earthly powers and possessions. Under such circumstances, it is not difficult to feel that the very heavens themselves are conspiring against African manhood. What are your most immediate responses to a statement like that?
Wow, Amos Wilson was one of our great heavyweights, and that quote says a whole lot in terms of black men and the imagination, the religious imagination, and the way it has impacted our situation in the United States. I mean, what does it mean to acknowledge the fact that black male, that misandry, anti-black misandry, has been authorized, has been justified and legitimated by a religious tradition shared by black people, white people, other groups of people, a tradition that is, regarded as normative, universal, and necessary for all,
Absolutely.
And so, when I hear something along those lines, I can't help but think about black men as sacrifices, as sacrificial lambs and the like, and black men being subject to high levels of disposability based upon how they are imagined, religiously. And we've talked about this, in detail in other conversations. But in terms of the work that I do, a lot of it deals with how we have been imagined, and the way in which our imaginings in the minds of others, in the minds of people who look like ourselves, are informed by a particular metaphysical, ontological understanding of our existence in the world. So Amos Wilson, with that quote, he just, in so much, he encapsulates something that would take us an entire lifetime, brother, to really unpack if we would take it real seriously.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I said this on several of my shows that it's not always easy to find brothers who are in a position and or are willing to be outspoken about what's going on with black men. You have definitely been outspoken. Tell us, how did you come to that point where you decided to focus your work on the realities of black male existence, and tell us about, how did you come to it, and tell us a little bit more about what you've done in terms of shaping your perspective and your argument about black men.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first part is of course I'm a black man. I mean, it's an existential thing. We don't approach scholarship in a vacuum. We're not abstract entities. Everything that we do in the humanities and social sciences comes from somewhere. You know what I'm saying? And so I don't delude myself or attempt to delude anyone into thinking that these questions, do not have some type of existential mooring. So that's a part of it, and a lot of it has to do with my own biography. In terms of growing up, I'm a Floridian. I grew up in Miami, Florida, growing up in the 80s and the 90s, and dealing with what it meant to be a young black man late teens, early 20s, and the like, living during the era of the super predator, and the ideology that was directed towards our generation. And younger men. And so let's just say that that era had a profound impact on my life, as well as the lives of young black men who I grew up, many men who are incarcerated right now, some who will never come home. They have no release date, involved in drug trafficking, in jail for homicide and the like in different states, Florida, Alabama. And so, my move and my concerns about, masculinity and the like, have that there in those experiences. But more formally, in terms of, academic work and the like, it was me being a social science major. I graduated from Florida International University in Miami, Florida, and I was in a social science department where the degree that was conferred was one in sociology and anthropology, and it was in those areas that I began to look at questions of gender and masculinity and the like, and began reading deeply in Black sociology, Black psychology, and the kind of questions that were being wrestled with. And Ms. Wilson, is one person that you mentioned, Naeem Akbar, all of the kind of Afrocentric thinkers that were very, very popular in the 1990s, Malefi Asante, John Henry Clark, all those figures, and then kind of it evolving, and so I was also interested in religion because existentially, I was involved in churches, doing church work. I'd been a minister, and went to a theological school in preparation for engaging in full-time kind of ministry, and but also wanting to pursue that academically. So I had aspirations of not just doing kind of concrete ministry in churches and in the streets, but also to do it academically in terms of thinking, theoretical thinking, theology, and the like. And so let's just say that was my trajectory, and it was something that was inescapable in terms of the type of research and scholarly program that I felt I had to undertake as I evolved, and so questions around masculinity never left, and so in addition to all of what I just said, it's the impact of coming along in the academy, and being a minority, being in a situation where there are very few Black men who are working in various fields, and dealing with the gender politics, feminism, queer theory, post-structuralism, and all the questions that we are encountered, we are confronted by as we work on PhDs and the like, and also having to work that out. But I would say this: it is the question for me. So theologically and religiously, there were questions that I had to deal with coming out of that type of milieu that were coupled with the stuff of life that I was encountering coming up, and what I experienced as a young man in more pointed terms. So the questions about Black men and misogyny and homophobia, Black men as boogeymen and the like, all of that, kind of was, crystallized into one sort of thing. And let's just say that eventually I decided to write because I wanted to respond to much of the mythology and the pathology that was directed towards Black men. This whole idea of the Black boogeyman, this idea which I call ontological evil. That is that Black men are seen as inherently evil. That Black men are inherently evil. Black men are irredeemably,
Mm-hmm.
evil.
Right.
And that we are, get prone to violence, all levels of violence. That we're threats to women, to children, to communities, to ourselves, on and on and on and on. And the extent to which there was really no real response to that, particularly in my area of religious studies and theological studies. It was just a foregone conclusion that all of the assumptions about Black men being pathological and predatory were accurate. Okay, and so it's one thing to deal with that in terms of writing, but writing has its limitations. Writing is necessary. Writing is imperative. We have to, it's our bread and butter. But also to deal with it, in an activist kind of way, in a very public way, because our lives, the situation that Black men find themselves in, is a very, very, very public thing in terms of death. The work I'm working on right now, Book Beyond Death in Jail, really attempts to capture the reality that when we walk out our doors, we are presented with this imminent threat of being killed,
Yes.
And it means something to have a conversation about Black men where death is the starting point, where our mortality is the starting point versus how we are imagined by others as predators, as misogynists, as homophobes, as all of these things that have been imagined about Black men. So in a very, very broad way, that's how I came to where I am, and it's and it's an ongoing thing, but it's existential, and it's theoretical, it's academic, it's all of those things.
Well, tell me, bro, if you could, is there an experience, a direct experience you had that really forced you to start pondering what's going on with us? And is there also an experience you had in the academy, whether that was in grad school or as a professor, that further affirmed that this is something you had to take seriously in your work? Because a lot of us, a lot of brothers in the academy know what's going on, they've experienced it, but again, it takes something else to get you to a point to be public about these kind of things. These are usually things discussed behind closed doors. You know what I mean? But were there any experiences, outside of the academy or inside the academy that really opened you up, that really forced you to ask these questions and deal with this?
Oh yeah. I would, for me, dealing with the fact that I am first generation. I'm a first generation scholar in what I'm doing. I don't come from a family background that prepared me for this journey. And let's just say that professionally, I encountered serious professional obstacles that I perceived as being related to the fact that Black male from a particular background, and also just life and living and mortality, and I think the economic precarity that we have, our vulnerability, as men, and then dealing with these notions about Black male privilege and the like, and this whole idea that we Black males exist inside some type of paradise. We have this passport to everything, and really becoming despondent and let's just say upset, uncomfortable, tired of the quietism. So there's this type of quietism that exists that we know too well, where we agree that as Black men in the academy that we will censor ourselves. We will not say anything about Black masculinity in any kind of way that could be regarded as offensive to others. And so I decided, because of the work that I was doing, And so and a lot of it had to do with my work. And I would go back working with black males. I had an experience in Atlanta, Georgia. I spent 1 year at Morehouse College as a dorm director, resident a manager, and I had for 1 year dealing with freshmen at Morehouse College and dealing with much of the stuff that these young men were bringing, to the college, wrestling with personal issues, bringing them from their homes, families, young men having problems, issues with substance abuse and what have you. Young men, discovering that, his girlfriend is pregnant. He don't know what am I going to do? Who do I turn to? All sorts of psychological issues that were happening at that, in that space. But also at that particular time, it was the late 1990s. This was after Tupac and Biggie and the like, and there was this real concern. So I was me along with another a set of individuals from the Interdenominational Theological Center were brought to Morehouse College to do something to the culture, because there was this concern that these black males at this prestigious school had been seduced and enamored and were being destroyed by this quote unquote thug culture that was being, informed by hip hop and the like. And let's just say that that was one of the formative experiences that I had that really convinced me that I needed to say something about this and address these issues at some point in time. And so what happened, I carried that with me, and later on, when I earned a Ph.D. and I worked, prior to being at Wake Forest, I taught several years at HBCU, and living in South Carolina, living in Orangeburg, South Carolina, Claflin University, and I lived there for 6 years, and I wrote my book while I was there, and I saw and that experience itself, working with low-income, first-generation youth. And even living in South Carolina and living with the conditions. And so the first book that I wrote, was informed by that experience, a book on democracy and dealing with this thing that I called Third World America. And black men were caught up in it, in terms of prisons and all of that. And it was just inescapable. I couldn't get around it, and so I had this conviction, that pretty much compelled me to vocalize it, to speak it. It's just something that we can't ignore. And there was too much quietism. There was too much resignation around these issues. Right. And I felt that at a particular time, with social media, with the blogs and all of that, I chose not to just confine myself to academic conferences and articles and book reviews and the like, and to hit social media and just talk about it publicly and to deal with whatever may come from that.
Well, what would you say has been the response? How have you been regarded, whether in professional circles or privately, or I should say socially? But what has the response been to being outspoken about black men?
The response it's been interesting. It's been it's been a mixed response. On the one hand, I've had professional colleagues and others who have pulled me to the side and expressed their concern about my outspokenness and concern about the implications or consequences of what I might post on Facebook and what I've written on blogs and the like. And these are folks who are genuinely concerned about my future and well-being. But on the other hand, I have other people who have, they have, supported me, and they have been enriched by the candor, and people who themselves, for whatever reason, choose not to be as public. And choose not to, speak forthrightly about these kind of issues. And so it's been a divided response. But I stepped out because, for me, we're in a very precarious space. And, the issues of Black people, though we work within the academy, the issues of Black people transcend the academy,
Absolutely.
And, knowledge production, I don't think, and it's like what we're doing here and what you're doing here with Black knowledge, knowledge production cannot be limited to these academic spaces. The conversation about, Black men, Black masculinity, Black boys, that conversation cannot and should not be limited to colleges and universities, especially in light of the history,
right.
of demonization that colleges and universities have participated in terms of how we've been seen in this country. And so I gladly, stepped out there, and I will say this, forthrightly, there are consequences and there are penalties, and my career has been impacted by my candor, and and I live with it,
right?
And it is what it is.
But it is a challenge, and what you're pointing out, follows us to the academy as well, and people, often miss that. In other words, in many instances, we look at it like we've finally if we've gotten our child to college, it's over. We got them there, everything is good. And I've seen, young men who get to campus and end up in the same kind of situations, or even in terms of the same types of false accusations as brothers who may have never stepped foot on a college campus. I'll give you an example. The very first time I taught my Black male course, the very first time, very first semester, very first day of class, as I was walking to the door, two things happened. Two people were at the door. One was a detective and one was a military recruiter.
Wow.
The military recruiter wanted to, before I even spoke to my class on the first day, wanted to see if he could recruit Black males from class to the military.
Wow.
Right? And it was real interesting because, and I'm not going to pretend to remember the ranks because I don't. So those brothers who are from the military listening to this, I apologize already. But of course, he was a higher rank than the assistant he brought with him, who was a brother. And I managed to pull the brother aside at a particular point, and I asked him very pointedly, how many Black men do you know of that are at, the guy you came with, at his level? And he didn't want to speak clearly. He just kind of looked at me like I can't verbalize that. But I said, so I reworded the question. I said, are there, can you identify, 3? And he was like, he just shook his head, no. So here we are on the very first day where I'm asked to assist in the recruiting of Black males from college to the military, knowing full on from the Black male who's coming to help with that process that they will likely not be able to advance anywhere near their white counterparts. So that was one person. The detective, on the other hand, was there because he was suspecting that there was a student in the room that was a suspect or considered a suspect in a liquor store robbery.
Wow. Oh my God.
So I haven't even opened the door to the class yet. I don't even know who the students are. And these are the two people waiting on me. So when you talk about how Black men are viewed, it's so deeply embedded in the culture and the engagement, the day-to-day goings on. It's so deeply embedded in the belief system that it's difficult to kind of move past. And I find many Black males need a level of support that they're often not able to even articulate, because many of the programs, even those programs earmarked for Black students, target girls. You know what I mean? So even at this point, I've been at Fresno State for I think this is my 11th year. The population has dropped more than half. In terms of Black students, and the population of Black males is far smaller than the population of Black females. So I watch this, and usually, and I say this all the time, I go to Black graduations. Every single one I've been at, there's been an incredible ratio of 8-2 as far as Black males graduating. Hell, even last week I lectured at an incoming freshman seminar for Black students, and I want to say it might have been I think it was like maybe 11, 12 students, 2 or 3 may have been male. You know, these are the dynamics that I see on a regular basis. Yeah. So the hostility that you talk about is definitely present. It's definitely a regular feature. Now, have you seen that going on as well?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, in terms of the disparities, I mean, I've seen it my entire career. You know what I mean? I mean, I saw it. So right now, I teach at a rich white school in the South. You know, but
that's a trip unto itself, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, and prior to being there, I taught at I would say a poor black school in the South. You know what I'm saying? And so I went from I've seen going from one pole to the other, you know what I mean? And in both situations, in a predominantly black context and in a predominantly white context, you know, the gaps are just there. You know, overwhelmingly, the students that I have taught have been female, you know. When I was at HBCU, I mean, over 70% of the students that I taught were black and female, you know. My last semester, I taught a course. It was a course called Religion and Science, and I had a good number of students who were in the natural sciences in that course. And I had 30 students, and I would say 90% of the students in that class were black females, okay? And so I've seen it, you know, where I am. I mean, it's just typical. I mean, what you're describing, I think is typical across the board. You know, in the PWIs, and I see where I am. You know, the black males who are there, athletes, football players, basketball players, and the like. But black males who are just, you know, general regular students who are not tied to a scholarship, an athletic scholarship. You know, they are, you know, they're far and few in between. You know, and that's just an unfortunate, ugly fact that we refuse to really grapple with, you know, in light of all of the kind of, you know, gender ideology that we have to wrestle with. You know, I think that it's a shame. It's tragic that we have such a skewed view of black masculinity that is rooted in this type of, and I see it in terms of metaphysics and this type of otherworldly, you know, perception of black males that we can hardly even deal with the facts on the ground. You know, that you have in the black community in particular, we talking about the black middle class, that the black middle class, if we're going to talk about a black middle class, is overwhelmingly female. And that the black middle class is a class where, you know, black men are just, they are not represented in the kind of numbers that you would find in other populations, you know, comparative populations. And so yeah, I see it every day, you know, and as we going into a new semester, you know, I'm going to see it, you know, more, you know. It's just a persistent problem.
Well, to me, it goes back to an argument I've been making that you're not supposed to say, which is that Black America is basically a gynarchy. It's run as a gynarchy. You know, close to 80% of our families are produced in a context where men are not present in any formal major context. And when you match that with the education that you just mentioned, with the numbers, the dynamics, what we're seeing more and more is a dynamic where males are really kind of disposable in a particular way, and yet the families are primarily rooted in a kind of female dynamic. And I say that because even, you know, I've rarely heard that openly discussed in academic settings. I did see, to her credit, one undergrad student at a major conference in Texas I went through in 2015, and she wanted to talk about just the existence of a black matriarchy. She didn't even she didn't even proffer an opinion. She was just saying it happened, and she was kind of gently pulled off stage, and and it was kind of the end of the presentation. But nobody wants to kind of talk about this dynamic and how it kind of shapes relations. And I'll give you another example. I posted this week about a black male who apparently invited a woman who was not his wife. So I think his wife was gone. This is an article in the Griot, and the title of it is "New Jersey Man's Side Chick Burns His House Down After He Stood Her Up for Sex."
Oh, wow.
And basically what happened was his wife was gone. He invited another woman to his house in the middle of the night, and then he fell asleep. And when he didn't answer the phone, she went back to a gas station, went and got some gas and some matches or whatnot, and came back and burned his house down.
Wow.
And he had to walk or run his way to the police department with second and third degree burns. And the reason I mention that in this context is I posted the article really to kind of show how, you know, in a way, the dysfunction that we see in many contexts, even in terms of our relationships, has actually been shaped. And this is an ongoing conversation I have with people on social media, has been shaped by policies, been shaped by a very particular history, and in many ways where black men and women have been turned against each other. But what I was saying in this piece by posting it was we have a difficult time empathizing for black males. And sure enough, the response I got first and foremost was about how he, you know, was at fault for, you know, the infidelity. In other words, infidelity it overshone, you know, attempted murder. You know what I mean? The level of accountability. And even with people who would start by saying, well, yeah, we agree that she should go to jail, would spend the next X amount of time, at least 9 times the amount of time, talking about infidelity, but not about this, which is really intimate partner violence. And that's what I find interesting, because it's not this story. There are a million others that I post on regularly every year where people can just kind of overlook. And we have a difficult time associating black men with being victims, being victimized, and being worthy of acknowledgement, empathy, and advocation politically on their behalf. Have you seen that in terms of your experiences?
Yeah, you know, I think you nailed it. You know, we don't see black men as victims. You know, victimization is a luxury that black men don't have. You know, victimization is reserved for other populations, other groups. You know, it's our disposability. You know, it's the fact that black men, you know, can be sacrificed. Black men can be used as crash dummies for all sorts of things. You know what I mean? And you're right. I mean, there is no empathy. And I mean, if you belong to a population, black men in particular, you know, who are imagined as being outside of the human, you know, if you are imagined, here's the thing: if you're imagined in demonic terms. And that's the problem. So black men are imagined in deeply demonic terms.
Yes, sir.
And so because we're imagined this way, it is impossible, you know, when we're killed, whether we're killed by intimate partners, whether we're killed, you know, by the police or the state, and whether we, you know, we're killed unjustly, Trayvon Martin, you know, it's this imaginary that justifies our deaths, you know, and where, you know, the people who victimize us, you know, they're the ones who become, you know, they become victims, you know, and they become, so the conversation is not about this person, you know, jeopardizing this man's life. The conversation is about, you know, how she's being victimized by his infidelity, you know what I'm saying? So where the infidelity becomes the greater concern.
Yes.
It has more priority over the fact that someone, you know, engaged in an attempted murder. You know, that's basically what is attempted murder. You know, and it's funny as you said that, because I thought about, you know, years ago, Lisa Left Eye Lopez and Andre Rison of the Atlanta Falcons, and that story, you know, she burning down his house, you know, because of, you know, concerns about infidelity and other things, you know. And so, we do not have that luxury. And that means that there's no intervention, no advocacy. It means that interventions, it means that advocacy rather, on behalf of black men become problems for others, okay? So if you advocate, you know, for a black male who is quote unquote victimized, you are engaging in kind of a criminal act. If you're talking about a kind of intervention, you're engaging in a criminal act. If you turn the gaze and you turn him into a victim, and you look at this other person, and that person becomes a victimizer. That becomes problematic for a variety of interests and constituencies and the like. So it's like.
But let's also keep in mind, when you look at the end of the article about the New Jersey man, they mention another person in another incident, 33-year-old Tasha Young, charged with aggravated arson in April for setting fire to her boyfriend's duplex. Now, understand the connection between the two things. She set fire to his duplex because she was angry that he sent her home in an Uber, because I guess they were having a threesome and he decided to stay with the other woman. In the first news story about the New Jersey man, she was angry, not that he fell asleep, that wasn't her assumption. She was angry that how dare he call me of all people over here. So what I'm getting at is there's an expectation and an entitlement about what is expected of black men, but when it reaches a point where it's attempted murder, it's still acceptable, and we still have to find ways to make sure that we blame him from the beginning. And yet nothing that took place warranted his death. You know what I mean? And so when we get to, when I say entitlement, I'm talking about the kinds of beliefs manufactured over time in regard to black men. And I think within the black community, black men themselves are taught that they are beneath others, most particularly women. And so we have an entrenched belief, I would argue, that black men are fundamentally beneath their women and not worthy of consideration. Please go ahead.
No, absolutely. I think that you're absolutely right. I think that we have internalized it. I think that ideology, anti-black, misandrous ideology has been very, very effective historically, and particularly over the last 50 years. The idea that black male life has no value other than some type of utilitarian purpose, serving somebody's interest, being used for something, and we fail in some capacity to live out that type of utilitarian interest, then we become problems. Then we become candidates for all sorts of disposal plans, And so you can imagine, someone had this sense of entitlement, who is offended because this person is not performing a particular kind of role. And so because he's not performing a particular kind of role, that he becomes expendable. Because he's not performing his role, he is subject to punishment. So there are larger things there. So it's like, when we talk about black men, say police violence. We live in a society where those who are not black men, citizens, are given a license. When we see incidences, like Eric Garner, we see incidences of black men, Alton Sterling, who are killed by police, and those instances become replicated over and over and over and over and over again in our media and social media, saturated worlds. Then that normalizes our disposability. That says that you have a license to kill us, and that if you kill us, nothing will happen to you. If you kill us, you will be rewarded, and you can be, you can come up with all sorts of strange, absurd, and weird justifications for exterminating a black male. And so I think that's the larger thing. We have been trained, black men have been trained to see ourselves in that same way. We have a very difficult time in terms of our communication and interrelations because, we see each other as threats to each other, and we see each other through the lens of the dominant, the larger society, and so it doesn't take a whole lot for one black male, to dispose of another black male and find all sorts of justifications for that, and so it's a, and for me, again, this is this is really, in terms of the imagination, we have a belief system, we have assumptions, we have a priori notions that contribute to all of this, you know. And
Right.
so for me, somebody who's in, you know, who studies religion, who theorizes religion, I mean, all of this is a part of it. This metaphysics, and it contributes to our death. And so
Now, see, I want to get to that because we have less than 10 minutes, and I want to better understand how your work with because it's not only metaphysics. You also deal with literature and pop culture, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd like to know more about how those links, especially considering in the last week, LA Times just released an article saying getting killed by police is now one of the leading causes of death for young black men in America. This is a piece written by Amina Khan, and it says about 1 in 1,000 black men and boys in America can expect to die at the hands of police, according to a new analysis of death involving law enforcement officers. Now and then it says that makes them 2.5 times more likely than white men and boys to die at an encounter with cops. Now we can relate that to what we were also saying earlier, because if we're talking about a gynarchy, you know, and we're talking about intimate partner violence, we got to also look at the work of Sonia Starr, assistant law professor at University of Michigan, who makes the argument that men receive sentences that are 63% higher on average than their female counterparts for the same crimes, right? When you factor those things together, how do you find the kind of equity in metaphysics to see the reflection of that? You know, how do you describe that?
Well, I would say, you know, I can't say that I see any equity. I would say that, you know, metaphysics. So if we want to understand, you know, why you have these disparities in terms of sentences, whether they're, you know, they're interracial disparities or they're intraracial, you know, disparities, I think that we have to look at again, this type of imaginary. So I give an example. So Paul Butler, the legal scholar, you know, he in his book, his most recent book, Chokehold, you know, he basically says, and it's a book about, he attempts to give black men advice on how to deal with police and deal with the criminal justice system and the like. And he's a former federal prosecutor. And this is a prosecutor who just with candor says that black men cannot get any justice through our criminal justice system, that it's rigged, it's fixed, and the like, and that black men have to, you know, resort to all sorts of survival strategies in order to prevent from getting caught up in that. Okay, he talks about Karief Browder, you know, and that, you know, Butler says that had he counseled Karief Browder while he was in jail, he would have counseled him to take a plea deal. You know, Karief Browder did not take a plea deal. He fought his case and until he was finally exonerated. Okay, but Butler, who was this federal prosecutor, he says that it wasn't worth it. That he should have pled out. You know, so that he would have gotten out of jail early. Okay. So what does that mean? That means that there are entrenched, we're talking about an entrenched belief system that is beyond, I mean, it is beyond the human, it is beyond the material, it exists within consciousness. We can't get to these material consequences without attending to this metaphysical problem. And I can't say, I don't know how to overcome it. All I can say is that it's something that is befuddling. It is absurd. It's crazy. Think about this. So black people consistently have been 13% of the population. Okay, you know, 7% of that 13% black female, 6%, you know, of that 13% black male. How is it that 6% of the population is imagined in such heinous ways, okay, that we have this major disparity in terms of the prison population, in terms of disproportionality, over 50% and the like. And how is it 6% of the population and we have these major disparities in terms of unemployment? I can only think about this in metaphysical terms. I can only think about this, and it's the imagination. What happens to us within the imagination, and what we're dealing with is, 4 centuries, man, 4 centuries of thinking informed by religion. Religion has played a very a sinister role in this. The traditions in terms of slavery, in terms of the influence of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and the New Testament on how we think about black people. We forget that. I mean, it was Christianity it was justified by the New Testament and the Old Testament. We have these legends, these stories, the myth of Ham, and all of that, or some would call it Noah's curse. Yeah, that sort of thing, okay, that has been a part of the American imagination for centuries. And this is what we are up against over and over again. We can't deal with this material stuff because of all this metaphysical baggage that's in our way. But if you're asking the question, how do we get around it? I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer right now. All I can say, as theorists, as thinkers, as intellectuals, we can conceptualize and we can think about it. We can, go beyond the social sciences and political science or what have you, and look at and just think about how the imagination, contributes to our social demise.
Absolutely. And I think we only have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to be very concise. But I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring my show to YouTube, because there's been a population of brothers across the country who have been having these discussions. And they're in many ways, brothers in the academy listen to this on a regular basis, but often don't participate for fear of reprisal. Absolutely. And yet the dialogue has been extremely robust. It's been going on for several years now. And I think it's something that I want to have more of a connection with, because in order to come up with solutions, in order to come up with ideas, we need to be able to do so across class, across occupation. But I'm also very, especially in the early aspects of these episodes of my show, I'm trying to bring in more of the academics, because I want people to know that the brothers who are on the campuses are experiencing the same thing in many ways that we've been experiencing before we were on the campuses, And so I want those conversations to come together while we build a vocabulary to make sense of this, because in many ways we haven't, and there really hasn't been the kind of gender movement on behalf of black men that's helped us make sense of our gender experience. Gender is still kind of synonymous with female, and we have to kind of open that up. But in the last 2 minutes, if you could tell us 2 things. One, what people can reflect on about the way metaphysics applies to the lives of black men, and then 2, where they can find you, where they can hear more and get more of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And the big thing is that we have a very difficult time talking about material conditions. We have very, very difficult time talking about the material realities. We can't talk about, like, recently the Brookings Institution put out a report on the economic condition of black men. Okay.
Yes. A
very, very significant study. All right. We've had at least 2 generations. These studies show up, within each generation. All right. I mean, we can go back to Du Bois. We can look at E. Franklin Frazier.
Yes,
you
sir.
can even look at Patrick Moynihan, who was influenced by both Du Bois and Frazier and the like. We can look at Robert Staples, okay?
Yes, sir.
I mean, we've got even someone like Orlando Patterson, the sociologist from Harvard. I mean, we've had all this stuff, history, economics, to teach us where our condition is. However, we have been impeded from taking this seriously because of this metaphysical stuff, this idea that black men are these boogeymen, are demonic, and who are not worthy. They are not worthy of serious consideration, that our lives are so valueless and so trivialized that this information and data is just meaningless. And so that's where you take it. I think that's where we have to take it right there, is that this is why we can't talk about some of these issues, is because of the imagination, which is deeply, it's philosophical, it's religious, and it's been there forever. And I'll close with this. So W.E.B. Du Bois, that was his big dilemma. Du Bois spent his entire life trying to, quote unquote, prove the humanity of black people through science, through sociology. But Du Bois in his lifetime, unfortunately, did not succeed at doing that. So much so that he left and moved to Ghana, and died, when he did. And so this is an ongoing problem that we have. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on, I don't use Twitter too much, but normally at Facebook, Ronald Neal. On Tumblr, I've got a blog on Tumblr that's been there. It's called The Political Sexy. It's an old blog. I don't do too much blogging these days. Okay. But I'm not that hard to find on social media, and of course where I teach at Wake Forest University.
Well, man, I want to thank you for being on the Onyx Report. We appreciate it. And feel free to folks to comment in the comment section. We'll have Dr. Neal kind of glance at those on YouTube. All right. So thank you for joining us, and I will see you again in, it looks like October, 1st and 3rd Wednesdays of each month. So that'll be October 4th. All right. Peace.